Hi, good morning. My name is James Frazee and I am your professor for Psychology 300. Today I'm just going to be introducing you to this class and giving you a chance to get to know me a bit and find out about the subject that you'll be learning about for this semester. I brought you outside just to break it up a bit. I'm going to do most of my lecturing inside. I'll have some PowerPoints. I'll have some whiteboard action where I'm using a pen to draw on the board and describe things to you. And also I'll do a lot of this, which is talking. I'm not going to do any reading from the book, but I do want to really point you to the book. This is the book that I've chosen for you. It's you can see mine's got some little notes in it. Psychology by Deborah Licht, Misty Hull, and Coco, I can't say her last name. So there you go. This is a book all about you, all about people, all about the science of human behavior. That's what psychology is, and a little bit about myself. I've been teaching at I've been teaching this course, Psych 300, at Cosumnes River College for the last decade. I've never taught this class online this way. I did used to teach online, and I stopped teaching online. The reason I stopped teaching online was that I found I was incapable at the time of making good choices about how I spent my time, and it meant that I was too involved in the class when I wasn't doing the class. So what I've chosen to do now during this forced online time is I'm going to be regulating the time that I spent on the class, and that's going to be through doing my lectures during the summer. So this is June, you'll be seeing this in the fall, and I'm going to get all of these lectures done so that I can focus on your learning experience. Is something that I feel like is going to be really missing when we go to an online college. Something that I would have seen in the classroom when you showed up every day and I could see your face and you could see me, and we would have the type of a relationship of a professor and a student, or mentor and a mentee, where I would be able to track sort of how you were doing. That's going to be gone. So now what I'm going to have to focus on is online interactions and helping you guys navigate your own motivation, your own behaviors, and how you're working through this class. I'll tell you a little story about the first online class I took back when I first began to teach online, and this again was a choice I made. I thought it was going to be something great for me. It was not something great for me. I did not enjoy it. It was not a good experience. I don't think my students enjoyed it. Most often I think my students enjoy this class, but in that particular case they really didn't. What ended up happening was I realized halfway through that I was completely done with the class. It was so long, it was so arduous that I lost my motivation. Now that never happens when I teach face-to-face. When you're there with me in the classroom at the college, we're in a context that calls forth from us certain behaviors. When I was not there, when I did not know those students, it didn't call forth from me any sort of professorial behaviors. It called forth from me pretty lazy ones. And so that's something that I'm going to help you guys avoid. The only time I took a class was when I was preparing to do that online class. And about halfway through that class, do you know what I said? I said, "Oh, I got this. I don't need this class anymore." And I quit the only online class I've ever taken. Now I want to help you avoid that. I want to help you stay focused, maintain your discipline, and get through this class. This is an important thing. We're studying about human behavior. There's no other class that could be more applicable to all aspects of your life, all facets of what you're going to do, than learning about how humans behave, why they behave, and what we can do to change their behavior, what we can do to change our own behavior. I think this is a class that you're going to find very enjoyable, and I look forward to teaching you all the material in this class. Here we go. Hello. This is an introductory video to who I am, so that you guys have a perspective on who's teaching you this class throughout the entire semester. My name is James Frazee, and I am a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a cousin, an uncle. I'm all sorts of things to all sorts of people. My introduction to psychology came in college. Like most of you, this is your first course in psychology. I took my first course in psychology my freshman year of college. It didn't really interest me. It wasn't the thing that led me to a career doing this. Later in college, I had a personal experience where my grandfather had a stroke. And when he had a stroke, I became fundamentally interested in how the brain works to produce human behavior. Now, I just told you I was a father, and recently my son asked me a question that was so profound. He said, "Dad, I understand how the brain works to cause people's bodies to move, but what gives the brain thoughts?" And I thought, wow, what a wonderful question. A 9-year-old's asking that question. It took me 20 some odd years before I started asking those questions. How does the brain function? And how does that produce consciousness? Those are some questions that we're going to look at in this class. Spoiler alert, we don't know. I can't really give you any explanation as to why we don't know, considering that the 1990s were the decade of the brain. We thought for sure with supercomputing we'd be there. We'd already understand so much about the brain, and that's really where I came into neuroscience, was at a very promising time that we would answer all these questions, fundamental questions about how the brain produces human behavior, and it was almost like a mechanistic thing that we would boil it down to. Really, humans had brain capacity, and that brain capacity led towards certain behaviors, and we would just be able to model it and see the structure of human behavior by just looking inside the brain. I'm happy to report that I was fundamentally wrong about almost all of my assumptions of humans, about human brains and behavior. So today, I'll give you a little bit of insight into me and my thinking and where I come from, and what my life has done to shape my view of psychology. I think each of us have individual perspectives, and it's important to understand that when you come to this class, you're going to have your life's experiences, and you're going to understand the world from your perspective. So I want you to see the lens through which I'm seeing the world, and that has to do with some of my experiences. First off, I was born in Orange, California. So if you're familiar with Southern California, Orange, California is right next to Anaheim, where Disneyland is. My parents moved around a whole bunch when I was little, and eventually, when I was born in Southern California, we moved when I was about 4 years old to New York City, not New York City, into New York. My dad was working in the city, and we were living in a place outside the city. So I did my first elementary school there. I have an older brother. He's 15 months older than me, so we had a life growing up together with siblings who were very, very close in age. When I went to elementary school, it was pretty confusing for me. I never felt comfortable in school. I got in a fight. I tried to hit a kid with my lunch pail. I hit a little girl instead. I got bullied. And things were difficult for me in school. I didn't particularly like school so much. And that's strange given that I never left. I'm still here. They pay me now. But it was something that really wasn't my cup of tea. I don't know why. There were many factors about that, but school doesn't have to be something that you love if you love learning. The school environment might not be the best place for you, the school setting and who the people are that are helping you learn. That can be an advantage or a disadvantage. But really, it comes down to your perspective on how much you want to put into your efforts of learning. I'm here to tell you, if you guys are here in this class, if you're taking this class, you're showing the motivation to learn. If I'm not the perfect person for you, don't let me be a hindrance. You continue to work through, and you continue to push through. So even if you don't have the best teachers, the best environment, the best house, the best parents or friends or neighborhood, you're the factor that's going to influence how you succeed in an academic environment. And almost all, not all, almost all of that comes from the amount of work you're going to be putting in. That's true from my perspective. I'm not some super genius. I'm not some sort of person who was exceptional in all aspects of academics his whole life. In fact, I was quite average. What was different, I would say, than other people was my curiosity, my gregarious nature, and how I took the time to work. I took the time to work when other people wouldn't. When other people were sacrificing their time for fun, I was sacrificing my time for work. And that ended up paying off hugely in the end for me. It really has been a transformative thing for me to be able to have a job where I'm intellectually engaged, where I feel like I'm contributing to my community. I get to hang out with you guys all day. Well, we don't get to hang out anymore, but I do get to influence you, and I get to know you in some aspects of your lives, and that's been very rewarding and fulfilling for me. And it pays the bills. I get to live here. Check this out. This is pretty rad. I live on the river. And so I really appreciate my job, and I appreciate that how I got to be in such a desirable position was through hard work. It wasn't through I was special. It wasn't through I was privileged. You might hear those words these days. It literally had to do with the fact that I outworked my peers. And that's what I want for you. I want you to learn that you can determine your own future based on how much you put in. The efforts that you put in, you are not defined by the characteristics that are immutably transferred to you upon your genetic conception. You have agency. You have the ability to change your life, and that's a really profound and wonderful thing. We'll look at how humans function in this class, and we'll understand to what bits do we not have control over. I'm really tall. I don't have control over that. I'm not going to be a good spy because people would see me really far away. I wouldn't be a good clandestine operator because I'm outgoing in nature and loud and tall. Sure, there are some immutable characteristics about you that make you not particularly good at a situation. I would be a terrible mother. I don't have a uterus. Things like that. But the differences in humans are actually wonderful facets of why we need variety, and what diversity gives us is many different functions in humans, and that is really a blessing to all of us, is that we are different from one another. Don't let anybody tell you you're equal. You are not. You're unique. There's no one like you. Well, maybe if you're a monozygotic twin, there's somebody who at least genetically started like you, but guess what? Your paths diverged from there. You are a unique individual. No one on earth has ever been like you before, and that's an exciting thing. The diversity of humans is really a special thing for us because it allows us to learn from each other's experiences, us to benefit from each other's proclivities, and that's a really wonderful thing. Back to my story. Didn't really like school, but whatever. My parents moved us back to California, where my dad in the very early 80s began working in Silicon Valley in technology, and specifically telecommunications. Turns out that was a very good move to move us to San Jose, California, and I grew up in San Jose when my dad was working in the tech industry. My mother worked as a school teacher, and I went to a private school that was adequate academically. I would not say didn't excel in academics, but certainly taught character and certainly taught personal responsibility. And so I appreciate that about my elementary school and junior high and high school. My high school did not prepare me for college, but it turns out I was a really good diver. So every 4 years you become super interested in diving because that's when the Olympics are on and they show everybody doing the cool flips and twists. You guys call them gainers, we call them reverses. But I spent an inordinate amount of time practicing diving, and doing that I was really good at it. I won some competitions early, and I didn't really like it that much, but I was really good at it. So I kept doing it, and I got an opportunity to dive in college. And how cool was it for me to go and dive in college, because it really gave me the opportunity to get some advantages over other people. For example, because I came from a high school that didn't really prepare me academically for college, being a student athlete at a Division I college, there's a lot of academic help for everyone. And so that academic help for everybody really benefited me. I needed help. I needed help more than almost all of my teammates who had gone to high schools that were sufficient and had taught them. And I barely got into UC Irvine. That's where I went to undergrad. I moved from San Jose down to Orange County, back to my place of origin. And when I was in the university, my first year, I was struggling exceptionally. I didn't know how to work. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to study. And so I'll talk about my college experience on the next video. That's my wife. All right, so college. College was a really confusing time for me. I wasn't really academically prepared for it, as I told you, but what ended up happening was, because I was an athlete, I had a lot of support. Now, I want you to realize that you have a lot of support too. Our student support services at UC Irvine were based on me being in the athletics department and me being a student athlete. So they really wanted to support us because we wouldn't be eligible to compete for them unless we had sufficient grades. And UC Irvine isn't really a place where you can take easy classes. It's a big research university, and they don't have necessarily some sort of program for student athletes where they can get away with taking not really academically oriented classes. They have to get those students to that level. Now, some of my friends who were athletes didn't actually make it, and they became ineligible to compete academically. This was a big problem because they tended to be the better athletes. But the support program for us was very influential and really helped me to begin to be ready to do the academic work at the university. I had tutors, I had scheduled study times, and that seems like it's a big advantage, a big privilege for me to be able to have all this sort of help. What's really cool is actually you have all that help. You have tutors available to you. You have academic study times available to you through our student support services at Cosumnes River College. So don't feel like you need to be some sort of a special student. Those are available to all of our students. Specifically, if you need help, reach out to me. Send me an email, let me know, and I'll be sure to help you find that personalized, individualized help that's required for you to succeed in this class. All right, back to college. I started out as a chemistry major, and that was great. I really enjoyed chemistry. I had a good high school teacher in chemistry, Mrs. Lynn. Thank you, Mrs. Lynn. She was somebody who did actually prepare me academically for college, but when I got there and I took chemistry class, turns out I was still underprepared from a mathematics standpoint. I hadn't done all the work that was requisite to do so, so I had to put in extra work because I was unprepared for college classes. Like many of you might feel like you're unprepared for college classes already. Let me encourage you. All you need to do is stick with it. If you stick with it, if you continue to maintain your academic discipline, which is your ability to really focus on the material that you are learning, rather than focus on what you don't know, focus on what you know, focus on how you can expose yourself to the things that you don't know. In my case, it was math. And math was my biggest sort of obstacle. I never felt competent at math. I never felt good at math. I felt like math was something that I wasn't talented at. I didn't realize it, but I had to take an entire year of mathematics at the time in order to even get ready for my chemistry. And when I was taking that math, it was really a struggle. And I had to go to tutoring, I had to go see the TA, I had to go to office hours for the professor. It really was just a total bummer for me because I was spending all this time on math, something I didn't like, something I didn't find enjoyable, something that wasn't my cup of tea. I wanted to just do chemistry. Eventually I wanted to do cognitive science when I switched my major after my grandfather had a stroke, but turns out you gotta do the math. You have to do things that are uncomfortable, that you don't feel like you have talent at. But if you think about all the myths, all the narratives, all the superhero stories that we have, what really becomes the superhero's advantage, it starts out as the thing they're weakest at. And if you watch that sort of narrative build, this is why we tell those stories, is that's true for humans. What's true for humans is that we have natural proclivities, things that we want to do, and we think that means that we're talented or not at a certain particular aspect of our life. And it's not talent. The great Malcolm Gladwell wrote in his famous book, about 10,000 hours being how you become an expert at something. Now, if you put 10,000 hours into anything, you become an expert at it. You've done it for 10,000 hours, and the way your brain works is that your experiences over time are going to accumulate. And they're going to accumulate so that you are better than anybody else at that particular thing after 10,000 hours. Now, I could spend 10,000 hours trying to be a mother. There are some physical limitations. I don't have a uterus, as I said, so I could never be that. But if I spent 10,000 hours studying childbirth and studying midwifery, I could probably become a very competent midwife, somebody who is aiding in the birthing process. So again, we have to take those physical limitations, those mental limitations, and then put forth the hard work necessary to accomplish our goals. So at UC Irvine, I spent all the time really studying hard, becoming excellent in math. Actually, no, I barely passed. I know that sounds bad. I barely passed my stats course. Got C minuses in stats. You know, you might be thinking, well, what's this guy doing teaching statistics when he got C minuses in stats? And the reality is that was where I was at the time. It was an accurate reflection of how well I understood mathematics of statistics, how well I was able to reasonably do the work in statistics. It's not true now. It used to be true, but it's not true now. The difference between me then and me now is thousands and thousands of hours of work. Taking a weakness I had in mathematics and making it my strength. Why I'm a professor now who teaches psychology statistics, why I'm somebody who can teach you how to use statistics adequately, is because of my hard work. It has nothing to do with me being good at math. I was bad at math. When I started, I was incompetent. The difference is hard work. Now, I'm doubting for you that psychology is going to be the hardest class you take. I'm doubting for you that it's going to be the real challenge to you. I'm thinking other more science-based courses like biology, chemistry, physics, even the math courses, calculus are going to probably be the more challenging courses for you. That's my thought. But I want you to take this class seriously because this class has to do with all those other classes. Chemistry, math, biology. All of that we're going to touch here in this course. And so you're going to have to become a mild expert at all of it to understand the materials that are going on here in psychology. Psychology got its start when the universities began to expand their disciplines. Now, universities started out teaching courses like theology. And theology, the study of man's attempt to get to God, or the nature of God, morphed into two other disciplines, and that's where our Western universities took theology and turned it into philosophy and mathematics. So those are the two disciplines that sort of arose into availability other than theology at universities. The universities like, say, Oxford, something starts in like the year 1050 or something ridiculously long ago. These disciplines that emerged were basically areas of expertise that people who were students there needed to obtain mastery of. And theology, philosophy, and mathematics would be a really, really good college degree if you could get a degree in those things. Also, a lot of people think, oh, theology, that's just talking about God. Well, those people had to read the original Latin and Hebrew and texts, so that were written in a language that they didn't speak, right? So these were not just people who were learning about God, they were learning about human languages as well. Out of that came the study of psychology, and that'll be the next topic that we cover, is how did psychology come to be a discipline that was based in understanding the scientific principles of human behavior. People have been studying psychology for a long time, but they didn't know it. People have been trying to understand what are the principles that guide human behavior. They didn't have science at the time because science is something that came around relatively recently. You might not realize it because it's the water that we swim in. The science is this sort of systematic, objective use of hypothesis testing to figure out what factors have causal influence on one another. We develop hypotheses and we run rigorous objective tests on them, and we utilize statistics to tell us how likely those things are to happen by chance, whether or not we're seeing a causal effect between two factors, two variables in the lingo, or if we're just seeing things happen by chance. Now, psychology as a discipline didn't get started until in Germany, Wilhelm Wundt set up, his name's Wilhelm Wundt. I don't speak German, but sounds pretty German to me. He set up a lab to study humans' capabilities for things like their reaction times, how fast they could, tap a certain button. Little did Wilhelm Wundt know that he would be studying in 2020 how well people could do video games, but he was really studying how fast they could tap a little button. He was measuring their reactivity, sort of almost the physiology of humans' ability to react to their environments. And that became a focus of early psychology. He set up the first laboratory in Leipzig. I could never say it. It's in Germany, a city, Leipzig, Germany. And what he did was he studied how fast people could do things. He measured averages of populations, and so he would report out on how people were able to do certain physical tasks. He also set up a system where he was training people. He was training young people to do the same type of investigation into humans. And so that became sort of the first structural part of studying human psychology was through his laboratory, where he would take on students. In fact, a whole group of students came to see him there in Germany, and in fact, one of them was Edward Titchener, another was William James. Titchener was the first man to set up a lab here in the United States to study psychology. William James became the father of American psychology, and a man who is hugely influential even beyond just the field or the discipline of psychology is William James. His brother, Henry James, is one of the greatest American authors of all time. If you've never read Portrait of a Lady, go read that book. There's a first book recommendation. I'll give you a lot of book and movie recommendations as we go, for those of you that don't have enough on your plate right now. The problem with studying how fast people can move their fingers to touch a button is that it doesn't really answer any of those questions that have been begging an explanation for a long time. So what we really want to look at is what causes human behavior. What are the causal aspects of what we do and why we do it? And in order to do that, we had to move away from sort of the exclusively physiological reactions, and we had to start looking at what was going on in the mind. That was something that was initially avoided by these men who were studying how fast people could do certain things. It was avoided initially, but now we need to look intently at what's going on in the mind. And so there comes our first shift in psychology, and that will be our next video, will be what's going on in the mind of people. The most famous psychologist of all time is obviously Sigmund Freud. Well, that is if you don't count Dr. Phil. Freud was a Jewish man in Vienna in Austria, and he became a physician. So he went to their version of medical school and studied human physiology and actually became a neurologist, somebody who studies the brain or the nervous system. Those are all the nerves that go through our body and communicate to our muscles and get signals from our sensory neurons. And he studied intently about the human body, but he became preoccupied more with the human mind and some aspects of the human mind. And what he did to sort of understand that was he explored areas that people typically didn't want to talk about. Those areas were hidden areas, what he called the unconscious, what he described as something that was uncomfortable for us to realize about ourselves, and so we would suppress it. He's the one who gave us the language of things like projection and unconscious, he's not the one who invented them, but he's really the one who popularized them. And that idea is that there are aspects of your personality you don't like, for whatever reason. I don't like, say, my hairline or something. I do. That's fine. See? It's good. But let's say I don't like my hairline. Maybe the discomfort that I have with my hairline, I don't want to admit that I have sort of a problem with it, and so I'll suppress that. And what I'll do is I'll become extremely interested in my facial hair, because see, that's not particularly my hairline. I want to avoid thinking about that because that really bothers me. So I'm going to focus on something else. I'm going to displace it, or I'm going to project it out. I'm going to put it on something else. And Freud described the processes by which people would take the elements of themselves that they were embarrassed by, that they were uncomfortable with, and turn them into other problems. Now, what he also showed was a method by which people could free themselves of that, is that if they admitted to themselves what their problem was, that I'm really concerned about my hairline, that would take away any of the other issues that were arising from it. He basically felt like there's this internal pressure when we're not honest with ourselves about what's going on with our psyche, and that once we become honest with ourselves, once we identify that particular issue that's driving our problems from an unconscious standpoint, once we lance the wound, we can expose all the infected nastiness below it, then we're free. He called that method catharsis. And catharsis was the way to sort of express our unconscious desires, the things that we want to do but we can't do because we're bound by society, or we're bound by rules, regulations, church, parents, all these school, these people that oppress us, right? We have desires to do things, but once we express those desires, then they lose the power to sort of to hold a psychic energy, or be in our mind and bother us. Stress us is the word that we might use as a physiology stand-in for what he called unconscious conflict. Now you guys hear unconscious bias, but we'll get to why that's a bunch of baloney in the future. So we've gone from Wilhelm Wundt, Edward Titchener, William James, now to Freud. Now this is again around the turn of the century, the 20th century that is, not the 21st, the one that you guys experienced. But this is around the turn of the 20th century, and Freud is living and working in Vienna, Austria, and he has a buddy. His buddy's name is Carl Gustav Jung, and Jung sort of took Freud's ideas and ran with them and really sort of refined them. I find myself to be enthralled by Jungian psychology. Jungian psychology really sort of takes Freud and then expands upon it and says, look, we're not as simplified biological creatures as Freud sort of says, that just suppress our unconscious desires and conflicts, and that's where mental illness comes from. But there's more to humans than that, and there's a spiritual side to us. There's an effect that we have on each other. There's a collective or a social side to us. And Freud really focused on sexual conflict, or the sexual desires that were unmet or unexplored, and that those were really what caused people to have all this sort of mental illness. Jung admitted freely that there's clearly an indication that people who had unconscious desires sexually really drove them towards some psychological illnesses. But what he was more interested in is fundamental human behavior, not necessarily just sort of day-to-day stuff that gets us down, but also what motivates us, what makes us inspired, and what makes us different from other animals. And Jung explored aspects of cross-cultural religion, and sort of tried to boil it down to what is the least common denominator, or what are the things that all these different religious affiliations across the globe in different cultures share, and how does that tell us about a fundamental aspect of what humans do, why they do things, and what we can do about them. When we study psychology, we see that psychology has influences from all the other disciplines. I like to say that psychology is the most fundamental discipline, because if you don't have people, who cares what chemistry can do? If you don't have people, who cares what physics can do? If you don't have people, there's no anthropology. If you don't have people, there's no sociology. If you don't have people, who cares about music? Psychology is fundamental because it's the understanding that humans are the most important thing on Earth. The human brain is the most complex thing we know of other than the known universe. So it's really imperative that we study psychology. But we don't limit ourselves to studying psychology. We become experts in areas that influence psychology, areas like sociology, anthropology, physics, math, chemistry, biology. All of these aspects of human inquiry are fundamentally a psychological endeavor. All these other disciplines are very important for us because they are about humans and about humans' interaction with the real world. Psychology is a fundamental discipline. It's a discipline that that is the culmination of other disciplines, which is, well, what do we do with it? Once we understand chemistry, once we understand principles of biology, what do we do with them? That becomes the human aspect of it. That becomes where psychology kicks in. It's important for us to think through psychological implications of what we should do and why we should do things, the ethical limits to how we should use psychology. Should we use psychology? In fact, this has become a real concern now that we have big data. Big data has become an absolute boon and a burden to psychology. When we can look at human search histories and see what they're looking for and what they're studying, we can get real insight into their unconscious biases, into their when we look at these other disciplines, we see how fundamentally important they are to understanding humans is understanding humans' context, right? That's the physical world that we exist in. Those are the processes that govern things like biology. And they are immutable characteristics that we can't get rid of, right? So our biology is with us. We can't we can't transcend that environment. My dog right here, she's out there sniffing the world, right? We might be looking at it because we're fundamentally, we use that sense as our primary mode of investigation, whereas she's sitting there using her nose to investigate this entire situation. She can't transcend her biology and all of a sudden become, a sight hound when she's using her nose and her olfactory sense to really explore the world that she's in. We also have some tremendous differences from us and other animals that allow us to really become the investigators, to become the scientists. There are no dolphin scientists unless you read Douglas Adams' A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's my second book recommendation. Humans are the investigators of the world. We're the ones who set up systems of inquiry and structures to understand ourselves. There's no dog group that's sitting there trying to understand why dogs behave in that particular way. Humans, however, have all sorts of groups that are trying to understand this, from scientists to laypersons. We really are curious about what our behaviors mean and how we can change them, how we can guide them, how we can take control over our own behaviors. He's going to store up nuts for the winter? No. He's probably eating food trying to become as reproductively fit as is possible. His goal is to find all the nutritious objects that can make him fundamentally biologically stronger. It's actually a female, so there you go. She is making herself fit physically so that she's able to reproduce. She wants to have a good litter of babies and have enough food to be able to sustain through difficult times. Things like ovulation or nursing her young. As a mammal, she's going to need a lot of nutritious, valuable food, and so that guides her behavior. She has principles that guide her behavior, and if she didn't, then her ancestors that passed those down through a genetic inheritance and through cultural memes, as we'll get to. Even squirrels have memes, right? They learn things by observation. This is a classically mammalian trait. What's this guy doing? What do you guys think he's doing?
What's his psychology? He's going to store up nuts for the winter? No. He's probably eating food trying to become as reproductively fit as is possible.